Hello, and welcome to the Your Food Matters podcast. I'm Dr. Sue Kleiner, and I'm here with my great friend and colleague, Erik Bustillo.
Hello, everyone. Hey, Sue.
Hey, Erik. So, we are here today to talk about, of course, Your Food Matters on our podcast. If you enjoy this podcast, please share it with your friends and everyone you know. You can find us on all the podcast platforms: Apple, Amazon, Stitcher, etc., etc. You can also listen to us and watch us on the YouTube channel from the Move Nutrition Network. So, thanks again for logging on to us. And today we're going to do something a little fun. We're going to do a lightning round. We have started to get questions and we want to go through those quickly. Some of those questions may end up ultimately being whole podcasts by themselves, but at least you'll get some quick answers. And I want to start off with Erik and I not only have named this podcast Your Food Matters, but we have a tagline that is how to put your food to work for you. So we thought we'd explain that a little bit. So go for it, Erik.
Yeah. So as far as our food mattering, and also just with the lightning round and all that, if y'all are listening to this, feel free to send in questions because we want to do this a little more often. So answering questions and making you a part of our show as well. So our food mattering and putting our food to work for us. For me, when I think about this, I tend to think of how do I mitigate any issues? So, from an athletic standpoint and a performance standpoint, I want to make sure that I'm doing what I can to, in the moment, that day of, not have any sort of issues that will affect my performance. So, no sort of GI issues or gastrointestinal issues. Um, and giving me the fuel that I need for that particular day and for that training session or multiple training sessions. But in the big picture of your food matters, we have to think of the impact that food has on so many things outside of just performance and recovery, nutrition, and all of those things, because that's important. And we talked about recovery and protein. We talked about eating enough to fuel our body, support our immune system. Um, but when we put our food to work for us, we also have to think about things like inflammation. We have to consider just overall long term gut health and the consistency at which we're doing these things. So for me, that's when I think of putting my food to work for me and for the people that I work with. I want to think recovery, performance, mitigating any sort of issues that they might be having that day, or that, well, we want to avoid them having them that day. If something is wrong, how can we help our nutrition fix whatever the problem is? So using like medical nutrition therapy. But then, of course, we have to think of the holistic approach as far as anti-inflammatory foods and foods that may cause inflammation. Obviously, in excess, I think sometimes when we hear food and inflammation, the automatic thought process is eliminate sugar, and it's like, I mean, is sugar necessarily going to cause inflammation the way that we think of it? Eating that banana is probably not going to do that. So that there's all of these different things, and obviously supporting our immune system, hormonal health, and of course cognitive health as well. So there's just so much that our nutrition can do for us.
Totally. And the other side of Your Food Matters for me is that your food matters not only to you, but how it's grown and the supply chains in the products that you buy that are nutritionals or nutraceuticals, supplements, all of that. Your food matters on so many levels, and in relationships your food matters, and sharing your food matters. And there's just so much to talk about in those three little words: your food matters. Putting it to work for you also for joy and for creating, as I said, connections between people. That idea of breaking bread. When you share food, you are creating a network and a connection with others in very primitive parts of our brain. So you're putting your food to work for you. So there's so many ways to talk about that. And that, we could go on forever, which is the whole point of naming a podcast.
And it's so cool too because we don't. I think sometimes we think of it in the light of gaining muscle mass and size or losing body fat. And again, I've said this many times. I said it on the podcast. We tend to view nutrition through this lens of fat loss or weight loss, or if I'm going to make it a little broader, just body composition. But there's so much more to it. Like in the Hispanic culture, um, like coming together for food and spending all day together. Not like for me growing up, we would do like this pig roast. We call it la caja china, which translated is the Chinese box. It's basically like a wooden box, and you put like the pig in there to roast, and it's in there literally all day.
Hmm.
But it's an event, right? You have family
Love
and
it.
friends coming in
Yeah.
and out. You're playing dominoes,
Music.
listening to music,
Yeah.
exactly, all of that. Um, but the cultural piece, the other day, it was maybe a couple of months ago, I should say. Um, I was doing some workshops out of town, and I went with a couple of guys. One of them I'd met for that the first time that day. The other one I knew for some time, and we grabbed Ethiopian food. It was my first time going to an Ethiopian
Ah.
restaurant, and it was delicious. And listen to this mix: it's Ethiopian and Salvadorian. The
Oh,
restaurant.
wow.
So from El Salvador and from Ethiopia. I didn't have any Salvadorian food. We just ate with our hands,
With
talked,
Anjira.
got to know each other even more. It was so good. It
Yep.
was just amazing. And sharing that is so important. And that's separate from thinking about only nutrition for performance. Of course, they can go hand in hand. But yeah, so the I love that you said that because I didn't even think about that.
All right. So, lightning round. I have to say, Eric and I participate in this as judges at the ISSN annual scientific conferences, where the scientists, the researcher, often students, but sometimes they are faculty as well. Other scientists have to present the their entire study and their results in, what is it, in a minute?
1
One
minute.
minute.
Yep.
And we have a lineup of, like, 20 or 25 folks that go one after the other. They get a bell and a horn and it is great because in just a handful of minutes, the audience sees all this data and all this research, and then it can cue us to things that we want to learn about more and can dive into and look at their published literature. So this lightning round is going to be a little bit faster, but not a little bit slower. Sorry, but not too much slower. We're going to see how fast we can get through a couple of questions that have come through, that I said really could be a whole podcast on their own, but we're going to answer them quickly. So first and foremost, I'm going to ask Eric. This was sort of with a title of general athlete nutrition, but then a question about what are misconceptions and things that athletes really need to know. Go.
So, general athlete nutrition, as we've talked about before, making sure that the athlete is eating enough. To me, what I like to say is an underfueled athlete is not a very effective athlete because of many different things. Underconsumption can and will impact recovery, which if you're not recovering, eventually you're not going to be able to perform. So recovery is pretty much what it's all about, our ability to recuperate. Um, so we have the recovery component in eating enough, um, and we also have to consider the getting enough of the correct macronutrients and hydration. I really can't emphasize those things enough, from calories to macros to overall hydration. And I like to let athletes know, look for variety. Keep it as simple as possible. Looking for as much color as you can on your plate as often as you can, because that's going to ensure a variety of micronutrients, vitamins, and minerals, which includes electrolytes as well. Um, so keeping that in mind, and that's part of the need to know. Misconceptions is huge because athletes tend to think in terms of maybe like the general population, uh, body composition, and physique nutrition and performance nutrition although there is overlap, they're not one and the same. So thinking that a smaller body is a better body or a more fit body is not necessarily true. It's always going to depend on your sport and, of course, the individual. Um, and also understanding that it's important to work with professionals. So just finding something on social media is not can it help? Sure. There's good information, just like there's bad information, but working with a professional is going to be huge. So if you have access to a registered dietitian, a strength coach, an athletic trainer, and those are three different professions alone that can have their own wheelhouse and can stay in their own lane and work multidisciplinary, right? Physical therapy, all of that. So in a long answer that was trying to be very short and concise, that's what I would kind of say as far as the general athlete nutrition misconceptions and need to knows.
That was great. I mean, that was literally 2 minutes and 10 seconds. Good job, Eric. I would only add to that, the point that you made about physique nutrition and performance nutrition is super important because people do think of their exercise time as the time that they can benefit from a caloric deficit or an energy deficit. And so then they don't fuel going into exercise thinking, oh, this is when I can really get a weight loss bounce. And the fact is, that's the opposite if performance is your goal. Never underfuel your training. I mean, like, never underfuel your training. If you're going to cut calories during a training season or in a performance sort of block, you need to do that at a time other than around your training, maybe later in the day, but never underfuel your training, and that's super important. Okay, so I just took up another minute,
It's
and
all good. No worries.
okay,
On the
go.
next one, so the next one
Yeah.
I'm gonna ask you, Sue.
Oh, very good.
Um, so is so the way they worded the question, if passing to a full meat diet is as healthy as they say.
All right. Well, I'm going to take that as, what about eating a carnivore diet or a mostly meat diet? And then there's also the question of, is this just about only eating meat, or is it a question of, can you be vegetarian? I mean, it's not quite clear, but we're going with the carnivore diet. I think that's a better one. And so basically, there are issues with a lot of red meat, and some concerns for risk of cancer with high amounts of red meat, high amounts of deli meats, certain very specific types of meat. Nutritionally, the concern is not so much that you get a lot of protein, because in a healthy person, God, it almost seems like you can eat as much protein as you want to without a problem. The problem with that is what Erik mentioned before, there's no variety. And so you lack a whole host of other nutrients and vitamins and minerals and plant compounds and fibers, et cetera, that don't come in from meat. And so it is abundantly clear from decades of research that if you have a low fiber diet, particularly a low grain diet, whole grain diet, that your risk of chronic disease is quite high. But then there's also just all the, as we said, fruits and vegetables, grains and beans, nuts and seeds that you don't consume when meat is your main focus. And there's no ultimate goal that can't be achieved if you're not eating an only carnivore diet. So my question would be to that person: why would you want to eat primarily meat and nothing else, and or minimal of everything else? What is your goal, and how can we get you there in a healthier way? That I think is the real foundation to answering that.
Awesome, yeah, and I see eye to eye with you on that. I just always like to throw this little caveat of ultimately if someone does decide to do it, um, and they feel great and they see whatever results they maybe were looking for, and hopefully their blood work and all those parameters are coming back fine, then I'm just kind of like, all right, I mean, if you feel good, then by means go ahead and do it. I prefer variety. I prefer getting all these different colors and all of that because we know that the data show that this is what works well. And there's plenty of nutrition in like a good quality meat product and all of that. But what about gut health and the variety in fibers and all of those sorts of things? Um, but yeah, I'm kind of like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But it's I can't help but think it's maybe just a matter of time until maybe something negative does come about from that. You know?
Correct. Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, for sure. Okay. High caffeine drinks and performance. What is the story? Go.
Yeah. So in short, on this one, we know caffeine works. We know that it's the most studied ergogenic aid. For those that may not know, an ergogenic aid is something that can help in with performance, and that could be from caffeine, performance enhancing drugs, supplements, water, right? All different sorts of ergogenic aids, even contact lenses and certain grips. All of this can be seen as ergogenic aids. We know caffeine works. As far as the question goes on effects of performance of high caffeine drinks, in the question they didn't define high caffeine drinks, and I would not expect somebody to define that. I think it could be difficult for us to even define that in a general sense because this is not a very general question. When it comes to caffeine, specificity is extremely important, right? We got to think about the actual individual. We know that the 3 to 6 milligrams per kilogram of caffeine for individuals' body weight and all of that, we know that that's what the data show to be pretty safe. Again, generally speaking, but we have individuals who maybe shouldn't be consuming too much caffeine, who might be hyper responders. Maybe it gives them some tachycardia. So it's kind of hard to answer this question with a one size fits all answer. Um, I don't think that caffeine is unhealthy. Generally speaking, we see that it can be pretty safe, but there are individuals which it can be unhealthy for. Also, how much is too much? That depends on the person. What's their tolerance level? I'm not a fan of relying on something to make you perform well when it comes to just overall general performance. But I think that it's kind of an it depends, and I would just kind of err on the side of the 3 to 6 milligrams of caffeine per kilogram.
Yeah. So just to throw out some numbers, just to add on another minute, when we talk about 3 to 6 milligrams per kilogram, you can figure that out on your own. And that number comes from decades of research looking at how much caffeine will actually enhance your performance. And the enhancement is you can basically work out harder for longer and not notice it. That's kind of the synopsis. Not everyone. So starting with our what is 3 to 6 milligrams per kilogram? Well, if you're a 180-pound person, you have to divide by 2.2. Divide 180, your body weight, or whatever your body weight is, by 2.2, and you will get how many kilograms you weigh. If you multiply that number, and when we say 180, it's 81.8 kilograms. If you multiply by 3, 4, 5, 6, you will get the range of what may be a dose that research has shown enhances your performance over time. Now, I can say that that is very often for many of the especially female athletes that I work with, that's a really high number. And so we try a little less and a little less, and sometimes 50 to 70 milligrams is really all they need to kind of give them the kick in the butt to get going, and they're not really looking for measurable performance enhancement. So it depends on your goal. Plus the last thing is genetics. And you probably know if you're a responder or not. You can also get tested to see if you are. Some people are real responders, some people are not. Those of you who can drink coffee and go to sleep at night without a problem, you know who you are, that you're a non responder. And then there are people who are moderate, kind of in between. And you use caffeine if it benefits you, and if it doesn't, don't use it.
And I think just for number references for individuals, talking about this 180-pound person, the lower end, the 3 milligrams per kilogram, would be 245 milligrams. And the upper range is going to be 490. So let's just call it 250 to 500 if we're going to round up. One average cup of coffee is somewhere close to, again, it depends on the size of the cup and where you're getting it from, whatever, but we could just estimate to about 100 milligrams of caffeine or so in a cup of coffee. Again, it's going to depend, but just kind of rounding up to that.
Yeah, I think a shot of espresso is around 50, also 50 to, sort of. So you can figure out if you're getting a quad, venti or something. You're getting at least 200 milligrams of caffeine or more. In fact, you can, for most of the big companies, coffee companies, you can look up the milligrams of caffeine in a serving, and you can find that. Well,
Yeah.
that was our lightning round.
That was fun.
It
We got
was
to do it
kind
more.
of a slow lightning storm.
There's a thunderstorm in South Florida in the summer, lasting all day. But yes, that was good.
Yeah, that was good. So we're gonna let y'all go, and Erik get on his day, and I'll get sort of nose to the grindstone here. It was really fun to do this, and we'll do it again. Keep sending in questions. So
Send them in.
from Erik, my good friend.
Hope you have a good rest of the day. Thank you, everyone, for listening in.
Thanks a lot. Keep your food working for you. Bye bye.
Amen.